Detective Sarah Chen walked her usual patrol route. At 28, she had already earned a reputation as one of the most dedicated officers in the precinct. Her dark hair was pulled back in a regulation bun, her uniform pressed to perfection, and her badge gleamed despite the overcast sky. But today would be different. Today would test everything she believed about justice, duty, and the thin blue line that separated order from chaos. As she rounded the corner onto 5th Street, Sarah noticed a commotion near the old courthouse steps. A crowd had gathered, their voices rising in heated discussion. In the center of it all stood a woman in civilian clothes, jeans, a simple black jacket, and worn sneakers. She appeared to be in her early 30s, with shoulder-length auburn hair and an unnaturally calm expression. "Ma'am, step back from the building," Officer Rodriguez called out as he approached. His partner, Officer Mills, flanked him from the right. Both men had their hands resting casually on their duty belts, a gesture meant to intimidate rather than protect. The woman didn't move. She simply stood there, her hands at her sides, looking directly ahead at the courthouse doors as if she were waiting for someone. "I said step back." Rodriguez's voice grew louder, attracting more attention from passers-by. A few people had started recording with their phones, sensing that something significant was about to unfold. The woman finally turned to face the officers. When she spoke, her voice was quiet but clear. "I have every right to be here." Mills laughed, a harsh sound that cut through the morning air. "Lady, this is a restricted area. We've had credible threats against this building. You need to move along or we'll move you along." Sarah watched from across the street, something nagging at her instincts. The woman's posture wasn't that of someone who was lost or confused. There was a confidence there, a certainty that seemed at odds with the situation. "I understand your concerns," the woman replied, her tone remaining level despite the growing tension. "But I'm not leaving." That's when Rodriguez made his first mistake. Instead of asking for identification or trying to understand why she was there, he immediately escalated. "Turn around and put your hands behind your back. You're under arrest for failure to comply with a lawful order." The woman's expression didn't change. She didn't argue, didn't resist, didn't even ask what she was being charged with. She simply turned around and placed her hands behind her back, as if she had been expecting this exact moment. The zip ties went on too tight. Sarah could see that even from her distance. Mills seemed to take pleasure in the restraint, pulling the woman's arms back further than necessary. A small wince crossed her face, but she made no sound of complaint. "What's your name?" Rodriguez demanded as he began patting her down for weapons. "Silence. I asked you a question." Still nothing. The woman stared straight ahead, her breathing steady and controlled. It wasn't the silence of defiance or fear, it was something else entirely. Something that made Sarah's skin crawl with unease. The crowd was growing larger now. Office workers heading to their morning jobs had stopped to watch. A local news crew happened to be in the area covering a different story and had turned their cameras toward the unfolding arrest. Mills found a wallet in the woman's jacket pocket. He opened it roughly, scattering some of the contents onto the sidewalk. "Says here her name is." He paused, squinting at the ID. "Captain Elena Vasquez." Rodriguez snatched the wallet away. "Captain of what?" "The neighborhood watch." He tossed the ID onto the ground dismissively. "Probably fake anyway." Sarah's blood ran cold. She recognized that name. Everyone in law enforcement should have recognized that name. Captain Elena Vasquez wasn't just any captain. She was a decorated Army officer who had served 3 tours in Afghanistan, recipient of the Bronze Star and Purple Heart. More importantly, and more recently, she had been appointed as the new liaison between military intelligence and local law enforcement agencies. Sarah had seen her photograph in the departmental briefings just 2 weeks ago. The woman standing zip-tied on the courthouse steps was supposed to be meeting with the district attorney this morning about a joint task force operation. But Rodriguez and Mills clearly hadn't been paying attention during those briefings. "We're taking you in," Mills announced, grabbing Elena's arm roughly. "You can explain your fake ID to the booking sergeant." Elena still said nothing. She allowed herself to be led toward their patrol car, her head held high despite the plastic restraints cutting into her wrists. The crowd murmured with concern, several voices calling out that this didn't look right. Sarah knew she had to act. She quickly crossed the street, her heart pounding. "Rodriguez." "Mills," she called out, jogging toward them. "Wait a minute." Both officers turned, annoyed at the interruption. "This doesn't concern you, Chin," Rodriguez snapped. "We've got this handled." "I think you need to look at that ID again," Sarah said carefully, trying not to escalate the situation further. Mills kicked at the scattered contents of Elena's wallet. It's fake. Has to be. Look at her. Does she look like military to you? That's when Elena finally spoke, her voice carrying across the morning air with quiet authority. You have 3 minutes. 3 minutes for what? Rodriguez demanded, his face reddening with anger at what he perceived as a threat. Elena's gaze moved slowly across the crowd, taking in the recording phones, the news camera, the growing number of onlookers. Then she looked directly at Rodriguez. 3 minutes before they arrive, she said simply. Before who arrives? Mills stepped closer, trying to intimidate her. Your imaginary army buddies? Elena didn't respond. She just stood there, zip-tied and surrounded, with the patience of someone who had weathered far worse storms than 2 overzealous patrol officers. Sarah felt her radio crackle to life. Multiple units were being dispatched to their location. She could hear the urgency in the dispatcher's voice, though she couldn't make out all the details over the growing noise of the crowd. Rodriguez, she tried again, more urgently this time. I really think you should. Back off, Chin. Rodriguez whirled on her. Unless you want to join your new friend here in the back of our cruiser. The threat hung in the air for a moment. Sarah had to make a choice, back down and watch this disaster unfold, or risk her own career to do what she knew was right. Before she could decide, Elena spoke again, this time loud enough for everyone to hear. 2 minutes. The crowd had grown to nearly 50 people now. The local news crew had moved closer, their reporter speaking rapidly into her microphone as she provided live coverage of what was quickly becoming a public spectacle. Is she seriously giving us a countdown? Mills laughed, but there was nervousness in his voice now. Something about Elena's absolute certainty was beginning to penetrate even his thick-headed arrogance. Elena's eyes found Sarah in the crowd. For just a moment, their gazes met, and Sarah saw something there that chilled her to the bone. It wasn't anger or fear, it was disappointment. Disappointment in a system that was supposed to protect and serve but was instead humiliating one of its most dedicated defenders. 1 minute, Elena said quietly. Rodriguez had had enough. That's it. You're going in for threatening an officer. He moved to shove Elena toward the patrol car, but Sarah finally found her courage. Stop, she shouted, stepping between them. Rodriguez, I'm telling you, look at that ID again. Really look at it. Get out of my way, Chin, or... His words were cut off by the sound that Elena had been waiting for, the deep, rhythmic thrum of military helicopters approaching fast from the north. The first Black Hawk appeared over the downtown skyline like a dark bird of prey, followed immediately by 2 more. The crowd looked up in amazement as the helicopters circled the courthouse area, their downdraft sending papers and debris swirling through the air. Rodriguez and Mills stood frozen, their earlier confidence evaporating as the reality of the situation began to dawn on them. The helicopters didn't land, they didn't need to. Instead, 3 unmarked SUVs came screaming around the corner, their tires squealing as they pulled up to the courthouse steps. The vehicles hadn't even come to a complete stop before their doors were flying open. 12 soldiers in full tactical gear emerged, their movements precise and coordinated. These weren't National Guard weekend warriors. These were elite special operations personnel, and their presence transformed the entire atmosphere in seconds. The crowd immediately stepped back, creating a wide circle around the arrest scene. Even the news crew repositioned themselves at a respectful distance, their camera still rolling but their reporter's voice dropping to a whisper. The lead soldier, a tall man with the bearing of someone accustomed to command, approached Rodriguez and Mills with purposeful strides. His uniform bore the insignia of a lieutenant colonel, and his expression was carved from stone. Officers, the lieutenant colonel said, his voice cutting through the helicopter noise above. Release Captain Vasquez immediately. Rodriguez's face went white. Mills took an involuntary step backward, his hand falling away from his duty belt. Sir, we were just... Rodriguez began, but the lieutenant colonel cut him off with a raised hand. Captain Vasquez was here on official business, meeting with the district attorney regarding Operation Night Watch, a classified joint operation between Army intelligence and local law enforcement. His eyes swept over both officers, taking in their disheveled appearance and obvious panic. She has been under surveillance protection for the past 3 weeks due to credible threats against her life. The crowd murmured with shock and growing anger. The news reporter was speaking rapidly into her microphone, clearly understanding that she was witnessing something far more significant than a routine arrest. Mills fumbled for his keys, his hands shaking as he tried to remove Elena's zip ties. The lieutenant colonel watched impassively as the restraints finally came free, revealing the deep red marks they had left on her wrists. Elena rubbed her wrists slowly, working circulation back into her hands. She still hadn't shown any emotion, no anger, no relief, just that same calm composure that had unnerved Rodriguez and Mills from the beginning. "Captain," the lieutenant colonel said, his tone shifting to one of deep respect. "Are you injured?" Elena looked down at her wrists, then at the scattered contents of her wallet still lying on the sidewalk. Sarah quickly moved to collect the items, her face burning with shame for her colleague's behavior. "No permanent damage, Colonel Martinez," Elena replied quietly. "Though I believe we may need to have a conversation about interagency communication protocols." Colonel Martinez turned back to Rodriguez and Mills, who were both looking like they wanted the ground to open up and swallow them whole. "Gentlemen," he said, his voice dangerously quiet, "do you understand what you have done here today?" Rodriguez opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. Mills was staring at Elena's ID, which Sarah had picked up and was now holding. Even from a distance he could see the official seals, the security features, the photograph that clearly matched the woman they had just humiliated in front of half the city. "You have unlawfully detained a United States Army captain who was conducting official business," Colonel Martinez continued. "You ignored proper identification procedures, used excessive force in applying restraints, and destroyed evidence by scattering the contents of her official credentials." The helicopters were still circling overhead, a constant reminder of just how seriously the military was taking this incident. Sarah noticed that several more unmarked vehicles had arrived and were positioned at strategic points around the courthouse. Elena finally spoke, her voice carrying clearly across the now silent crowd. "Colonel, these officers were doing what they believed was their job. The failure here isn't entirely theirs." Rodriguez looked at her with confusion and something that might have been gratitude. Mills was still staring at the ground, unable to meet anyone's eyes. "The failure," Elena continued, "is in a system that allows law enforcement officers to operate without proper briefings about ongoing military operations in their jurisdiction. It's a failure of communication, not necessarily malice." Colonel Martinez nodded slowly, but his expression remained stern. "Nevertheless, Captain, protocol was violated. There will be consequences." "Yes, sir," Elena agreed. "But I would suggest that those consequences focus on preventing future incidents rather than simply punishing these officers." Sarah watched this exchange with growing amazement. Even after being humiliated and physically restrained, Elena was advocating for Rodriguez and Mills. It was a display of leadership and character that put them all to shame. The lieutenant colonel studied Elena for a moment, then nodded. "Agreed. We'll be recommending enhanced interagency training protocols and better communication systems." He turned to Rodriguez and Mills one final time. "You're both going to be part of that training program. You're going to learn exactly who Captain Vasquez is, what she's done for this country, and why respecting proper identification procedures isn't just policy, it's critical to national security." Rodriguez finally found his voice. "Captain, we..." Elena held up a hand, stopping his apology. "Officer Rodriguez, you thought you were protecting this courthouse from a potential threat. Your instincts weren't wrong, just your execution. Learn from this." The crowd began to disperse as the soldiers returned to their vehicles. The helicopters peeled away one by one, their mission complete. The news crew was already broadcasting their footage, and Sarah knew that within hours, this incident would be national news. Elena collected her belongings from Sarah, who was still holding them with trembling hands. "Thank you," Elena said quietly to Sarah. "You tried to do the right thing." "I should have done more," Sarah replied, her voice thick with regret. "I should have stopped them sooner." Elena studied her for a moment. "What's your name, officer?" "Detective Sarah Chin." "Detective Chin," Elena said, extending her hand, "sometimes the right thing is harder to do than we'd like. But you were willing to risk your career to stop an injustice. That matters." They shook hands and Sarah felt some of the weight lift from her shoulders. Colonel Martinez approached Elena as the last of the crowd dispersed. "Captain, your meeting with the DA has been postponed until this afternoon. We need to debrief this incident first." Elena nodded, then looked back at Rodriguez and Mills, who were standing by their patrol car looking lost and defeated. "Colonel," she said thoughtfully, "I'd like these officers to be part of the briefing this afternoon. If they're going to be involved in the training program, they need to understand the full scope of what we're dealing with." Martinez raised an eyebrow. "Are you certain, Captain? After what they just put you through?" Elena's smile was small but genuine. "Sometimes the best way to turn a mistake into a lesson is to include everyone in finding the solution." 6 months later, Detective Sarah Chen stood in the same spot on 5th Street, but everything had changed. She was now wearing the uniform of a lieutenant, having been promoted after her role in reforming interagency communication protocols. Officer Rodriguez walked up beside her, also wearing new insignia. He had been selected to head the new multi-agency liaison program, working directly with military personnel stationed in the city. "Hard to believe it all started here," he said, looking at the courthouse steps. Sarah nodded. "She could have destroyed our careers. Instead, she made them better." Mills had also been transformed by the experience. He was now an instructor at the police academy, teaching new recruits about proper identification procedures and the importance of interagency cooperation. His classes always began with the story of Captain Elena Vasquez and the morning that changed everything. The recognition. A black sedan pulled up to the curb and Captain Elena Vasquez stepped out, now wearing her dress uniform complete with all her decorations. She was here for the dedication ceremony of the new Interagency Communication Center, a facility that had been built in direct response to the incident 6 months ago. Sarah and Rodriguez approached her, both saluting smartly. Elena returned the salute, then surprised them both by extending her hands for handshakes instead. "How's the new program working out?" she asked Rodriguez. "Better than we ever expected, ma'am," he replied. "We've had 0 incidents since implementation, and cooperation between agencies has improved dramatically." Elena smiled. "And Detective Chin, I hear congratulations are in order." Sarah's promotion had come with a commendation for courage and integrity in the face of difficult circumstances. "Thank you, Captain. Though I still think I could have acted sooner." "Growth comes from recognizing our mistakes and doing better next time," Elena replied. "You've both proven that transformation is possible." The dedication ceremony was attended by officials from every level of government, local, state, and federal. The new communication center would serve as a model for similar facilities across the country. As Elena spoke at the podium, she looked out at the crowd and saw Rodriguez, Mills, and Chin in the front row. Behind them sat dozens of other officers and military personnel who had been part of the new training program. 6 months ago, she began, a miscommunication led to an incident that could have damaged relationships between our agencies permanently. Instead, we chose to learn from it. We chose to build something better. The applause was thunderous, but Elena wasn't finished. "The officers involved in that incident showed me something important that day. They showed me that even when systems fail, people can still choose to do the right thing." Detective Chin risked her career to speak up for what was right. Officers Rodriguez and Mills chose growth over defensiveness when confronted with their mistakes. She paused, letting her words sink in. "That's the foundation we've built this program on, the understanding that we're all human, we all make mistakes, but we can all choose to be better." As the ceremony concluded and people began to leave, Elena found herself standing once again on the courthouse steps where it all began. Rodriguez approached her, his expression serious. "Captain," he said quietly, "I need you to know, what we did that day, it wasn't who we wanted to be. Thank you for helping us become who we needed to be instead." Elena nodded. "Officer Rodriguez, that morning you thought you were protecting this building and the people in it? Your heart was in the right place. We just needed to align your actions with your intentions." Mills joined them, looking more confident than he had in months. "The academy recruits always ask me the same question," he said. "They want to know how you stayed so calm, so patient when we were treating you so badly." Elena considered the question, one she'd been asked many times in the past 6 months. "I stayed calm," she said finally, "because I knew that anger and resistance would only make the situation worse. I trusted that the truth would come out, and that good people would ultimately do the right thing." She looked at each of them in turn. "And I was right." As the sun set over the city, Elena walked back to her car, her mission complete. The incident that could have ended careers and damaged relationships had instead become the catalyst for positive change throughout the entire region. The new communication protocols had prevented dozens of similar incidents. The training program had improved relationships between military and civilian law enforcement agencies. And 3 officers who had made a terrible mistake had become advocates for reform and cooperation. Sarah Chin was now being considered for a position with the FBI's Joint Terrorism Task Force. Rodriguez had been invited to speak at conferences around the country about interagency cooperation. Mills had turned his shame into purpose, becoming one of the most effective instructors the academy had ever seen. But perhaps most importantly, Elena's quiet dignity in the face of injustice had reminded everyone involved that true strength isn't about fighting back, it's about staying true to your principles even when others fail to recognize them. As she drove away from the courthouse, Elena reflected on the lesson she had learned that day. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is remain silent and trust that the truth will find its way to the surface. The military had arrived exactly when she knew they would. Justice had been served, not through vengeance, but through transformation. And 3 minutes had been enough to change everything. 1 year later, the Elena Vasquez Interagency Communication Center had become the model for similar facilities in 12 other states. The training program had been adopted by law enforcement agencies nationwide, and incidents of miscommunication between military and civilian authorities had dropped by 87%. Rodriguez, Mills, and Chin had all advanced in their careers, but more importantly, they had become better officers and better people. They each carried with them the memory of a woman who had shown them grace when they deserved condemnation, and patience when they deserved anger. Elena had been promoted to colonel and was now overseeing similar programs across the country. But she still remembered that morning on the courthouse steps, and the choice she had made to remain silent not out of weakness, but out of strength. Sometimes the most powerful response to injustice isn't to fight back immediately, it's to trust that the truth will emerge, that good people will ultimately do the right thing, and that 3 minutes can be enough time to change the world. The story of her arrest had gone viral, but the story of what came after, the healing, the growth, the transformation, that was the real victory. That was what proved that even in the darkest moments, hope and human decency could prevail. And sometimes that's exactly what the world needs to see. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe and join our community of storytellers. We love hearing from viewers around the world. Where are you watching from? Drop a comment below and let us know what you thought of Elena's incredible story of patience, dignity, and transformation.